All right, so we're about to go live now. Hello, welcome to some Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
And today, we're making some content. But before we do that, buddy, I want to show the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast.
On this podcast, we like to talk about games. Which is a very weird thing, I guess, for what we're doing right now because we're not talking about games. We're not even really talking about like games related
Yeah,
stuff
nerd canon
even.
stuff, yeah.
Yeah, like normally we're talking about nerd canon shit all the time, right? But this isn't nerd canon shit.
This is
This
like
is just a
millennial
thing.
existential angst.
Yeah, yeah, yes. We're talking about Bo Burnham's Inside. In 2020, Bo Burnham spent basically the year creating his own one-man show, right? His own one-man Netflix special, which included a bunch of musical numbers, a bunch of camera tricks, all this other stuff, right? And I guess we're gonna talk about all that. But
Yeah, so
I don't
spoilers
know.
for it, I guess. It's mostly about the music, so it's hard to spoil.
Yeah,
But
yeah. What do you?
yeah, there's nothing.
I have no idea what you could spoil for this, but sure.
Um, That's a good point. There's like it's all in the presentation, right?
Yeah.
The like the only thing that kind of like pops out to me is like people talk about this like his other specials were stand-ups, effectively stand-up specials, right? Because they were done in front of a live audience.
Hmm.
Friend of the show, Zhao actually thinks that this format works better for him because he seems to not super interact well with the audience in his stand-up specials. It's funny because some of the lyrics of the songs indicate that it's harder for him to do his job when he can't get the feedback from the audience, like that he can tell that he's being funny.
Yeah.
Um, Although I think he succeeds pretty marvelously. But I
Oh
actually,
wow.
did you not like this?
Roaring praise. I have mixed thoughts, I
Okay,
guess. Well,
yeah,
we'll talk about it, I guess, in the as we go on. Mostly, I'm just sort of in general uncomfortable with people performing in ways that feel. This almost feels like a cringe compilation in the sense of I get why it's like funny or compelling to like watch or whatever, but I also feel like it's harmful in a way. Like I'm almost like it's like watching someone commit self-harm. I feel like I'm watching Bo Burnham have a nervous breakdown and film it. And I just like that is a hard thing for me to really like buy into fully, if that makes sense.
no, it does, it does. From kind of just like a artistic point of view, the thing that stuck out to me is like I didn't engage with this like I did like a stand up special. I engaged with it
Yep.
more like a musical. Um, like I
Also
feel
true for me.
like I've been listening to the soundtrack on repeat, which is like
Ooh, interesting.
it's not truly a musical, right? It doesn't have like a narrative through line like say Hamilton did. Um, Although there's some very kind of consistent themes. Um, but yeah. What was the other thing I was gonna say along those lines? But yeah, so like I don't know the summary I came up with in my head is this special is like if Weird Al's UHF had a kid in 1990 and it grew up and became way too online and irony poisoned.
We watched UHF actually for the Akupara Games movie night, which I guess I think is very fair. UHF famously, for the folks at home, UHF famously has a bunch of just like cut-in gags that are honestly, I would say, the heart of the movie. Right, like the movie has a plot, it has characters, it has rising and falling action, all that normal shit, right? But some of the best stuff about this show or this movie about Weird Al getting a UHF TV station, like a local UHF TV station, and just kind of putting on whatever he wants, is they have these cut-in ads like what the one I always think of is Spatula City. Spatula City, right? It's this, it's this ad for a crazy warehouse store that only sells spatulas apparently. And it's just like there's a bunch of those, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
Spatula City is pretty great.
Also, stars a pre Seinfeld. What's it's Kramer? What's the because we talked about Kramer last time we cast.
What do we say? Is this Kevin Richards? Keith
No,
something? What the
Michael.
fuck is his name?
It's Michael something. Um,
Oh, it's Michael something?
I
Fuck,
thought
I thought it
so.
was a K name. Hold on.
No,
Kramer. I'm just gonna put that into Google.
Kramer.
Cosmo Kramer, fictional
Michael
character.
Richards.
Michael Richards. Wow, I
Yeah.
was way off.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, but I mean, I was gonna say like how many weeks can we talk about disgraced actor Michael Richards in a row? But yeah, this is he um weirdly probably a thing that maybe he would have been canceled for if he hadn't been canceled for his like because he plays like a mentally disabled
Yep.
janitor who
Yep.
sprays a bunch of
Does not
kids with
age
a
super
fire
well.
hose.
Let me tell you. I
um
mean, spraying the kids with the fire hose is pretty great.
yeah, yeah.
I have to say.
No, I mean it is what's the polite way to call it? It's of its time.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, definitely. I
uh,
mean, UHF was late '80s, right? Like it was
yeah,
way before any talk of this political correctness, whether that is a thing, it's not a thing, it's this or that. You know what I mean? Like it kind of predates almost all of that stuff. It feels like in my
yeah.
head, it kind of lives in the before
Oh
time, right?
yeah, it's like right on the cusp of, if not part of, like the kind of golden age where everybody thought we were at the end of history because the Cold War was
Yeah.
over and everything was great
Mhm.
and we didn't have new problems yet. Um, which
New problems like COVID 19
teen,
forcing you to stay inside, which is theoretically what the framing device of Inside is, right? Bo Burnham is stuck inside and he kind of films this one man show filled with all these musical numbers and these bits. And there's a bunch of them, right? And this is part of my thing. The thing I liked about Inside was the first half, which I would say is a pretty conventional sort of like stand-up special content, just but like delivered in a way that's a little more interesting than that, right? Like it is more it's almost more like a video essay you would see on YouTube, right? Like this has
right?
more in common with ContraPoints than it does with John Mulaney, if that makes sense. um
It does, and actually that's why I think I like the first half less. Which after
Whoa, really? Wow.
because
Okay.
because
All
I
right.
think the second half has more interesting things to say. So like the kind of point being is to your point, right? Like this part of this feels like Bo Burnham having a mental breakdown on camera. I maybe controversially think that like the big kind of breakdown moment is fake. Like I that
Mhm.
doesn't ring as true to me, which seems funnily enough very appropriate for what it is, which is kind of like a takedown of like
Yep.
internet take culture or
Nope,
whatever.
I entirely agree with that 100 bazillion percent. I mean, I spend a lot of I've been doing these weapon showcase videos for Grime or whatever. So I understand that, man, doing it in one take is hard. It
Yeah.
doesn't really happen, and
Right.
I have a lot of respect for Bo Burnham because he does so much of this stuff in just straight one single takes, right? There's not a lot of editing, there's no jump cutting, which you would expect, right? Like a YouTube video essay, right? If this was John Green and Hank Green, right? There would be all these jump cuts over everything because you don't like the way something like that plays. But I feel like Bo Burnham is actually kind of this perfectionist who's like, I'm going to sit down and re-record the whole bit until I get it,
Yeah.
you know, laser precision correct, which makes sense because that's also what his stand up is like, right? His stand up specials, What and Make Happy, I think are the two of
Yeah.
them. There might be a third one, but those are the two that are on Netflix that I also watched in kind of preparation for this. They include a lot of um precise timing jokes with like audio cues or like visual lighting cues or whatever that are just like you can tell like this is a guy who nails these rehearsals to get it right, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I actually that's part of why I think it works less well with a live audience because you can't like account for audience laughter in that way, right? Like,
Yep.
um, but kind of along those lines, right? Like, I think the lasting kind of artistic merit of this is probably the truest and best capture of kind of like what being stuck inside for years is like the essence of COVID-19. I don't know if anybody else has tried to do anything, but it's the only thing that's like kind of captured live that's got any mainstream attention, right? Like,
Yeah,
um,
that's the only thing I can think of.
also kind of like weirdly with like the way apparently like from what I understand is the YouTube algorithm doesn't like you talking about it because there's like such a high probability that you're talking about some bullshit about it that like people avoid talking about it actually. So this is kind of
I actually
untethered
did
from that.
not know that.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I mean, and I don't have hard confirmation of this. I just know that like the YouTubers I watch will like dance around it because it's easy to get flagged for misinformation if you just talk about it and then it because the automated regulation on YouTube is different. Um, but yeah, no, it's I think it's going to be important in that way, right? Like you're gonna be able to look like if I wanted to say like if I had like a kid or a nephew, right? Like that I wanted to show is like this is what 2020 was kind of like. This is like the best thing I can show him to kind of like give him that impression, right? Um, but yeah, do we want to walk through this back to front or front to back? I guess.
Yeah, I'm down for that. Yeah, so the first couple of bits are they're almost all songs, right? The first one is content,
Yeah,
right? Which is like the intro song. It blends pretty quickly into comedy. Um, and then just like a couple of like FaceTime with my mom tonight, uh, white woman's Instagram, sexting. These are all in here, and all of these to me read very traditional comedy bits, right? Like white woman's Instagram is observational stand-up comedy like cut to a song and like visual aids that are also very funny,
yeah.
right?
No,
And I think and this is the part that kind of like sells me, right? I don't love Bo Burnham. I think I also don't love Bo Burnham's other two specials, What and Make Happy, and they were good, and I almost admire the technical craft more than I kind of like more than I laugh, right? Like it's not like
I agree with that.
I I'm almost more just impressed at how good he is at the comedy than you would expect because I would just laugh if he was good at the comedy, right? Like, um, and I
Curious.
think that sort of holds true, kind of like here, right? These are bits. White women post kitschy, dumb bullshit on their Instagrams and watching a skinny white guy recreate their poses or whatever over and over again while he's singing this catchy song. That's just a good bit, right? Like,
It's an excellent like I think White Woman's Instagram might be the best like clip of the whole thing. Like because they're all very inventive and they're all kind of like have this kind of like done on a budget kind of effect, right? Like I think that there are better songs out there, but like the effects in Welcome to the Internet are good, but they're not as like impressive. I think as White Woman's Instagram, which if you haven't seen it, like you can go watch just that clip on YouTube, and I think it's worth it.
yeah,
I think it's a very catchy song, but I think it's definitely worth watching with the visual effect because it does really evoke the thing that he's talking about, which is a white woman's Instagram, right?
yeah. But the thing is that this stuff is all toothless at the end of the day. There's a little bit of it in content, and also a little bit of it in the beginning, I would say, of comedy. But so comedy is the song that is focused on kind of satirizing like white male comedians and how kind of there's this I don't know there's this underlying sort of like liberal streak of comedians that think they can save the world with comedy. This is what he's making fun of, right? The beginning of that bit though, I think is actually very real, and he's kind of talking about like himself and his career and kind of like harshly reflecting on it, right? But the back half of that bit I think is pretty toothless. FaceTiming with mom is pretty toothless. These are just bits. There's not really anything deeper underneath the scenes here other than kind of like vague like social media is bad posturing, but like not in a bad way, right?
Yeah.
i'm not
So
trying to i'm not trying to say that these are bad. They are just not that profound.
yeah, so I've got a couple things here. First, I want to know: did you follow Bo Burnham like when we were in high school when he was doing his stuff? Because he's like our age, right? Like I am slightly
Yeah,
older than
no, he
him.
is literally our age, right?
Yeah,
Like I
I'm
think
slightly
he's
older than you. I think because
okay.
I was slightly older for our graduating year. But yes.
Yeah,
But
like
it
we would have gone to school in the same year as Bo Burnham, I'm pretty sure.
yeah.
I did not follow any of his shit in high school. I really met Bo Burnham, I feel like, after college.
But did you see any of his
Because
YouTube stuff? Right? Because like that's like
no.
kind of okay. So he does musical comedy on YouTube for like a handful of years before he goes to college. I believe he actually went to Harvard. Um, but he does musical comedy on YouTube, which is what he is playing on the screen during right before Problematic. Like he's watching it happen because like some of those songs, again, more of their time, right? Like
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that I've actually seen a couple of them because I feel like there was this while where YouTube wasn't a thing where I was paying attention to anything but the viral videos,
mm,
and they are kind of ethereal in the void. And outside of like, I think of bro comedy or whatever it was called. I'm
I'm not
thinking of
familiar.
the Derek Comedy.
Oh, Derek,
The
what's his name came
Yeah, like
from?
we like Donald Glover famously
Yeah,
came from Derek Comedy, and I remember watching those Derek Comedy bits, as they came up on YouTube, just because somebody was like, "Oh, you gotta watch this thing, it's so funny," or whatever. And I'm sure that happened with Bo Burnham stuff, but I've never like looked into it to remember what any of those bits were.
yeah. No, I mean, I saw it early and I watched a bunch of it. Like he was a person that when his name came up later for his specials. It caught my attention because it's like, hey, he was a YouTube guy that turned it into a real thing, right?
Yeah.
Um, the other thing too I wanted to talk about kind of in this vein is the song that you skipped over is also the song that I like the least, which is How the World Works.
Oh, How the World Works.
Works.
I actually like How the World Works quite a lot, but
So
I have
I don't
thoughts
like
on
How
it, I
the
guess.
World Works because to me it's just kind of like a very tired Twitter take. Like it doesn't feel fresh to
Mm,
me. And the thing I want to say in favor of it is the reason I think I don't like it is because it's such a masterful imitation of the children's song format. Like this is the thing that I think is the real kind of genius of the special. Is
okay.
he really nails the styles of every single song. Every single song is in like a style, right? Like one that's recognizable if you
Yeah.
think about it. Like the Weird Al style parodies, right? Um, uh, and a children's song is meant to convey an idea kind of very simply so a child understands it. And that kind of like demeaning attitude is kind of what I chafe against in kind of like this very kind of like very Twitter take, right? Like, and it's fine for what it is. And obviously my own opinions aside, like this is a thing that's woven through the other songs too that doesn't grate on me as much as it does in How the World
Yeah, no,
Works.
100% I'm with you every step of that way. I am just I don't know, man. I don't want like obviously I don't want to get
Yeah.
politics, but I am deeply exhausted by some of these sort of like batshit sort of like Twitter discourse things that happen, and it's just it just exhausts me, right? All it does is drain the life force right? In this kind of never ending and never satisfying quest to sort of, I don't know, I guess I would say identify like the perfect politics. And I feel like that I got that same feeling out of How the World Works. The thing that I like about How the World Works is I just think the bit is funny, right? Like
That's fair.
in a just a performance, the way that he talks to the sock. For those of you who aren't watching but are listening along, How the World Works starts as a very simple video or a very simple song about how, oh well, actually the bees carry pollen to the flowers, and that's how you get flowers. Would you look at that? Everybody works together. And then Bo Burnham's hand becomes Socko, the sock puppet, who's like, actually, it's just like the conquest of like capitalism and colonialism and neoliberal fascism, and it's all the history written in blood, and everyone's exploiting everyone else, and right, it's just,
Like I said,
and then
a
yeah,
very
and then
kind
the
of
bit
standard Twitter
devolves
take. Yeah.
and the bit devolves where the first Bo yells at the sock puppet and like oppresses the sock puppet. This is the part that I think is funny, and why I think it's just like a good bit, right? Like outside of the sock puppet take, just like that confrontation is just like, I don't know, a guy
No, I
yelling at his own sock on his hand for having and demonstrating that the sock is like kind of weirdly correct, and like bullying the sock into then performing the song in harmony with its bully, or I just like all that stuff. I thought that was funny, but I hated the content of the takes themselves. It felt like very touch grass kind of shit. You know what I mean?
yes, no, and I obviously had a harder time getting past it than you because I absolutely agree with you. I think there's some deeper stuff there too that I really don't want to get
Yeah, I
into,
don't even
but yeah,
disagree with a
yeah,
lot of the
yeah.
politics, right? I just disagree with the like, I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah. No, which is funny because like the others there's other songs also going to this, right? Like he's got two versions, I guess, of the same song, which is just like shouting about Jeffrey Bezos, whose platform we are on right now. Um,
yeah.
uh, or I guess not anymore because he left Amazon and whatever, but it's
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I'm looking at the Wikipedia thing just so I can make sure I have the structure right. And it says he then sings Bezos 1, which satirically praises Jeff Bezos. and was that even satire?
I mean,
Like, I think it's sarcastic, I guess. I don't think it's satirical. I think it's just it's honestly barely even sarcasm. He just kind of sings Jeffrey Bezos's name a lot.
no, that's the second one. The first one, he says, what he names it like Gates, and he names a couple of billionaires, and he says amateur is like he calls them like amateurs or something, and he says like drink their blood and fuck their wives, which I guess you could call satire because I don't think he's actually telling him to do that. Um,
Ah,
yeah, but yes, but
yeah.
like the first one has a little bit more content than the second one, where he just sings Jeffrey Bezos over again, over and over again. But
Yeah. And
yeah,
and to be honest, I think those are that like the Jeffrey Bezos bit. There's also another one in here that I thought was oh, the unpaid intern bit. Um was that the unpaid intern bit is very good, but it's good because of the back piece of it where it cuts in the middle of the song so he can film a reaction video to the song that he just sang, right? And then he continues with that line because okay, to set this up for the folks at home, he sings the song. It's maybe a minute. It's maybe less than that, like 45 seconds, called Unpaid Intern, about how it sucks to be unpaid interns. How is unpaid internships legal? Whatever, right? Then the song cuts and he starts a reaction video to the song, right? But at the moment that the song cuts in the first take, it just cycles back again. And he is now reacting to the reaction video, and that loops a couple of times. And he's reacting to the reaction video of the reaction video of the reaction video that he had recorded like a second earlier. And I just think that whole bit was like, that's the genius shit. That's the high level shit that I was there for. It's all in one take, and the thing is, it's all in one take, and it's also perfectly like it honestly kind of boggles my mind because obviously he would have had to do a number of different kinds of takes for this, right? Like he did a take to get the timing right, but in the thing itself, because he's reacting to the reaction and then it plays the stuff that he just said. There's just like something very surreal about that I thought was great.
yeah, and I actually, so I think it loops one too many times. Like it started to get on my nerves, but but I think that that also helps because like since the song's playing in the background, you get the musical backdrop, which like gives the song a little bit more life than like the the whatever 45 seconds that it has to actually live, right?
Yep.
Um, uh, and I think that's actually a thing that's kind of consistent with these songs. They feel like I want to say like half a verse short, which makes them very bingeable, right? Like they make me want to play them on repeat because I feel like you don't get like um I don't get closure out of them, I guess, right? Like this is why I want to
Okay.
listen to them 45 times in a row because they're like
Yeah.
they get like one less repetition than I think a typical pop song does, and I don't know that made it very much kind of like earworms for me. But I think unpaid intern is kind of like the biggest form of that just because it is cut so aggressively. Um, but yeah, um, so and then so the other thing I wanted to say, so after this it goes into sexting, which is a decent song, but the thing that seemed notable to me about this is it could have been a song that's not like set in this time. And I want like the thing that makes me think about it is I wonder how many of these songs he was like in some stage of writing before he got
Yeah.
locked in in his room for a year.
Yeah, like the sexting, white woman's Instagram, right? Like, FaceTime with my mom tonight. These are the kinds of superfluous ones. Sexting, I didn't think about, but absolutely is in that group. It's kind of the least. It's just sort of like the least applicable. I guess all. So I think so. The thing, okay, if I put my like film critic hat on for a second, like I think the through line here is the medium of social media, right? And how we are interacting with one another on social media, which gets explicitly called out later, where he kind of where he sort of talks about how you don't need real people. You can just engage with everyone through social media. So I think that that's what this is sort of like going for. But like some of these things are much tighter in than the other, right? Like Problematic, which is a song about apologizing and sort of satirizing the apologies of people who have to apologize for their problematic past, is much closer in to that sort of like theming than white woman's Instagram, sexting, which are kind of like very far out in that orbit. I guess I would say. And I think over the course of the special, it gets closer and closer to that part at a point where it just, like honestly for like the last 30 minutes, I'm just like not laughing at all. I'm just like, Jesus Christ, go see a fucking therapist. Like, God damn it. Like, you know what I
What's the meme
mean?
you can make out of this? Men will literally make an entire Netflix special instead of seeing a therapist.
Instead of seeing a therapist. Yeah, that's exactly what it was like. That's exactly what it was like. And I had the same feeling about Nanette. Did you ever watch Nanette?
No, I didn't. I haven't.
Nanette was a Netflix special by I think like an Australian lesbian comic who both tells a good stand-up special that has a lot of jokes in there that are like funny and you laugh at, but is also like talking about some like deep shit. Hashtag deep shit, right? And not just about, not just about like the homophobia that she was or like the sexism that she's on like the receiving end. Like that's a piece of it, but it's really about the medium of comedy like itself, right? And she's commenting a lot on what it means to be a stand-up comic and to kind of to engage with it as a medium, which I think, Bo Burnham also does.
Yeah,
He does it
that's
more in
the
his
theme in
other
Make
specials.
Happy. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, he does it more in his other specials than in here, but it's very similar sort of thing, right? And it got to a point in Nanette where I was in a similar spot, but Nanette had sort of primed me better in a certain sense for the like for the lecture, I guess you could call it, right? The first half has a bunch of jokes and they're funny, but eventually kind of the lecture comes on and you're just like, whatever, right? You feel the injustice of a woman who is persecuted for her sexuality and her gender, right? Um, with this, I do get that through line is there, right? And I have that empathy for Bo, who is clearly like self-destructing under the weight of the isolation and loneliness that comes with, right, being inside, that comes with the quarantine of COVID-19. But like it almost breaks the barrier of the medium itself and makes me just be like, stop killing yourself in front of a camera. I don't want to pay for this. You know what I mean? Like at a certain point, just like seriously, like go fucking see a
yeah. No, I
therapist.
mean, and part of that is how much of it is real, right? Like I said,
Mm.
I think the breakdown is fake as it's recorded, but I could see it
Yeah.
as being a real thing that he said to do a take of so that he could like get that into the into the movie. But like that's
Yeah,
like
I mean, I have no doubt that there's a lot of artifice in that piece, but the emotions at play and kind of the experience, I feel like is very authentic. Lou in the chat notes that's pretty standard for Bo. His specials tend to end on a downer. That's true. Make Happy ends on a big downer. Also,
yeah,
what I guess also ends on a downer. That's the one where he's like, he sings a song about how much he he loves the audience, but he hates the audience and he fears the audience, right? This is where a lot of parasocial stuff came from, right? People
yeah.
watched this special and basically googled parasocial relationships, right?
Yeah, I wonder if that's
And
gonna happen with like he says something he googling um uh derealization, right? Like
yeah,
if that's gonna be like a thing now that everybody talks about because it's popular enough. um but yeah, so I mean part of this too is just kind of like an eternal discussion about like suffering for your art. How necessary is it?
yeah,
How much should you encourage it or discourage it, right? Like a lot of art comes out of real human suffering in either like documenting real ways that it happens or like the personal demons of some person, right? Like the number of writers that were alcoholics or drug addicts of some sort. And
yeah. I
how
mean, even recently, I feel like actually a good example of this might be sort of the cancel culture that surrounded two YouTubers I've talked about on the podcast. One is ContraPoints, the other one's Lindsay Ellis. They both got pretty heavily canceled at one point or another, and they both made huge videos about it, right? ContraPoints made a video about called canceling, right? She's like 2 hours long. I think it's a feature film, and in it she is talking about the abstract sort of what is canceling, what's happening in canceling. But she also very specifically talks about what the experience was like for her individually to have been canceled, right? And I've watched that video a bunch of times. I think it's great. I think it's insanely insightful. I think it probes the depths of our culture and society in a way I have seen few things do. Lindsay Ellis made a similar video when she got canceled called Mask Off. But that video is almost too personal. I watched it once and I'm like, I'm never going to be able to watch this again because I feel it was just too, it was like too real. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I just think that there's something about the distance that the creator can hold the audience at that can kind of keep me in this realm of I am not a rubbernecking person watching a car crash, right? I'm watching a performance, if that makes sense. Lou also notes in the chat, parasocial shit is the theme of all three specials, of both three specials. It's something he struggled with for years and is a huge part of why he stopped doing comedy for years. Yeah, that's another undercurrent to this, right? He makes allusions to over the course of the special, right? That he quit, that he said he quit and he wasn't going to come back, but he did, right? And eventually it's sort of revealed that he said he was having these panic attacks while he was doing the Make Happy special, and he was having these super severe panic attacks on stage, and he just cut it. He had to stop performing altogether in order to manage that.
I think the best part of that too is that's during All Eyes on Me,
All
right?
eyes on me. Yeah.
Yeah, where which it's kind of in the title, but he also like he tells it as if he's on stage and he's like faking audience reaction, right? Like if you just listen to it, it sounds like he's doing it live, but if you watch it, it's him like playing an audience reaction sound
Yeah.
on the computer, which I think is pretty well done. And this is like all beneath kind of like very surface level comedy of the video, which is like the style of song that it is combined with like that effect where you layer yourself over yourself performing, and he does that like seven
Yeah.
times, which is like very amusing. But like that's like that's why I think that this special is good, right? Like he's got like all these levels of things, but like to your point, right? It's the soundtrack to a man spiraling downwards again, right? Like according to him, he had climbed out of this hole by January of 2020, only to be sent back down it because we were all locked inside again.
Yeah.
You know,
I also feel a little bit weird on a personal level because I had a very easy time with quarantine.
yeah. No, I
you
mean,
know?
we're nerds. Like I did too,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. I'm a nerd. I'm naturally pretty introverted. I live with my partner who is, you know, a great kind of emotional support structure, right? A lot of my social life is conducted entirely online through, Discord, World of Warcraft, right? Twitter, right? My job situation was always remote. So like of all people in the world to really understand like the horrors of quarantine, I was not going to get there just because like I wasn't in the trenches in a certain sense. And in the same way that I could watch a movie about the Holocaust and understand, on an empathetic level the horrors of the Holocaust, I understand on an empathetic level the horrors of Bo Burnham's isolation and what that did to him mentally and everything like that. But I just I feel like if I'm a very extroverted party person who's a mid-level marketing guy at some New York firm, and I'm used to going out every Friday and Saturday night to my favorite bars with my favorite friends, right? And we're going to movies all the time and we're going to see shows or whatever, right? Like I would really probably connect with Bo much more here than me, Buddy, the naturally introverted guy with a robust support structure that was able to weather quarantine pretty effortlessly, was going to be able to connect with this guy.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with that. It's I mean part of that too is like the claustrophobia of the shots. Like even when he
Hmm.
shows like the other parts of his apartment, doesn't seem very large.
Yeah,
And like that's like the people who weathered quarantine in their tiny apartments, where essentially you're paying too much money for a very small apartment to live in a city where things happen, right? Like the part of that for me that's the reflect is there. I live in a more rural state, and I have more. I could go outside, right?
yeah.
Like and not be in any real danger because I'm in nature for the most part. But yes, that is definitely true. Um,
Okay, I do want to ask a little bit about the music. What was like what are the bangers in here? What are your favorite songs just on a
uh,
musical level?
on a musical level, Welcome to the Internet.
Okay.
White women's Instagram and All Eyes on Me, I think are my top 3. What about you?
Interesting. I think white women's Instagram for sure. I also liked comedy a lot, and maybe All Eyes on Me. I liked
Oh,
All Eyes on Me a lot. Maybe Problematic actually would be my like.
Problematic's also good. Yeah.
I don't know. I actually, you know what it would be? I think it would be comedy, Problematic, white woman's Instagram. White woman's Instagram is more of an earworm than anything else. Like it's the one that I've been like humming to myself. But but I think on a song level, I liked Problematic more because I thought it was. I don't know. I just thought that song was really good.
Yeah, I think white women's Instagram. I think part of it too is that white women's Instagram is very elevated by its video.
Yeah.
Um, like it's hard to divorce some of these things, right? Like,
Same thing with comedy, to be honest. I mean, the thing that made me laugh the hardest, maybe, was in the all of the little bits. There's a ton of these visual gags in comedy, and I watched it through, and then I went back and I paused it. Like, there's one where he has like, "Is it funny? Does it punch down?" You know, and
so
it's just
hold
like
hold
this.
hold right there because I do want to point out that it's extremely hilarious that 2 songs later is white women's Instagram, which by any like traditional definition is punching down, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of issues with the term punching down in general, right? Like, I think the sort of spirit of the philosophy is more true than the practicalities of figuring out what that means in any
yeah,
individual scenario,
right.
right? Like,
Like
so for instance,
trying to do mathematics to figure out what's punching down doesn't work as well as you think, but the spirit
yeah,
makes sense. Yeah,
exactly, right? Because it's like, oh, is Bo Burnham punching down because, I don't know, he's a super rich white guy and he's making fun of randos on Instagram who have, kitschy, pithy, they're constantly like resharing kitschy pithy bullshit. Like, yeah, I think you could make that argument, but I also think that you could make the argument that Bo is punching up at like a kind of upper middle class brand of white women that are, you know what I mean? Like, you could argue that both ways, and that's always been true, right? Like,
right.
you could argue that Black Widow is, I don't know. I'm trying to think of like a way that you
No, no,
could,
it
you know,
makes sense because he's like inhabiting the personality of a comic, which is kind of like this starving artist type of
yeah,
thing, right? Like, even though the reality of Bo Burnham is not that, right? Like, and honestly, in kind of the frame of the show, right? Like, he is suffering mentally, and the idea is that these people on Instagram are not, right? Like,
yeah.
I think that the middle piece where he kind of very sarcastically digs into this post that this girl makes about her dead mother, which
Oh
like
yeah.
rings
Oh
is
my
really
god.
sincere, right?
Mhm.
Maybe it's just the music, but like that like made me feel very sad, right? Like, even though
That
like it's
one,
supposed
I thought that actually did think that was legitimately mean. I remember at the time, I was like, at the time, at first, I didn't quite understand the bit that he was going for, but then I realized because I think the specific kind of thematic underpinning of that moment, right, is how effortlessly this woman on Instagram, plunges into and out of a deep personal tragedy, right? Because at first I was like, what is this post? What is he getting at? And then the song starts back up on the other hand, and you're just like, oh my god, I understand now, right? You're following her post as she's posting pithy bullshit. Then she has this, legitimately heartfelt, maybe a little bit shallow post about her mom, and then she just goes right back to posting pithy bullshit, and you're just like, oh my god, like this profound moment of personal tragedy is like just another in a long line of shallow pithy bullshit in this girl's life, and nothing really affects her. And I was just like, whoa, blah, 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 that's mean. Like,
yeah, no, I mean, and I think kind of like as a criticism of social media, I think that works because like, in real time, right? Like, maybe that's not as tight as it seems, but like if
sure.
you're scrolling down her Instagram feed, right? Like, it's 2 seconds between them, even though there might be several days between the actual posts that she's posting or
Yeah,
whatever,
not to
right?
mention that there is an inner life implied in anyone's, social media. If you were to go to my Twitter, right,
Right.
you know, you don't necessarily see if I have a terrible day, and because maybe I don't post about it. Maybe I just don't go on fucking Twitter. If you don't see that I have a spectacular day where my life changes profoundly, but I don't post anything to Twitter. You don't see that, right? So like any social media profile has that that relationship. It's something that people talk about all the time. I don't actually think Bo's talking about this though, because there is no other side to it, right? The only thing we see is the Instagram facade in this song, which is why I think it's kind of so mean. I think
Yeah.
it is implying that she doesn't have
No.
a rich inner life. I think, you know
No.
what I mean?
I think you're right. I think this is a standard kind of like because funnily enough, right? Like I think this this is he is kind of the archetypical edge lord millennial who gets woke as he gets older, right? Like that is kind of like the through line of this, right? Because like he was kind of edge lordy when he was posting these YouTube videos as 14,
Yep.
and then he like ages up and realizes that he turns around, which he does satirize with, like you say, problematic and comedy maybe, and in a couple of these songs, right? Um,
Hmm.
but there's a lot of this kind of like I am self-reflective and deep, and you are shallow. And you can tell that because you are happy and I am sad, and this is how I justify like my
Yep.
suffering to myself is that I actually have, some depth to me and you must not, and that is how I can justify myself to myself. Which, again, this is very much kind of like a go to therapy, touch grass type stuff. Um, but
Yeah, well, and so wait, how do we get on this? We were talking about something else.
uh, yeah, we were.
The visual bits in comedy? Is that where we were going off of?
Yes,
Right,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
okay, so we
yeah,
were talking about like punching up and punching down the flow chart because there's a bunch of these, right?
yeah, yeah.
The thing where he's writing
I mean,
he's like
my favorite.
writing jokes. What was your favorite?
So I think I know the one you're talking about. My favorite was definitely like it's like Malcolm X Weird Al intersecting to me.
Yeah, me. Yeah.
But I
Yeah,
think that,
like there's just a bunch of these like little, even just like honestly, even just the way, so there's this part where, because I think part of the way that this song works so well is it unfolds, right?
yeah,
The first couple of, bars, maybe the first verse is pretty straight and you don't quite see the satire yet because it's really laying the groundwork. Um but then it gets to this point where he has the pencil in his mouth, a pencil in both ears, and the pencil is writing really fast. Right, you're like, okay, I'm kind of being taken for a little bit of a ride. And then he does this weird walk around the room, and just the walk is funny. Like there's nothing deeper to it than that stupid walk is stupid and funny.
yeah, and I think the one you were referencing when you was time or comedy equals time plus tragedy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Comedy equals time plus tragedy, and then it's tragedy equals 9/11 and time equals money. Therefore, comedy equals
equals
money
nine
plus
plus 9/11.
9/11. It's like that. There's this part where he's writing jokes in the notebook, and one of the jokes is like, "What if a dog vapes?" And the back half of the song is what brings it full circle, right? Because he has the line that gets repeated a bunch. It's if your house is on fire and it's filling with smoke, call me and I'll tell you a joke.
Joke.
And with the implication there being, how fucking useless is it for someone to think that their jokes matter? It just doesn't fucking matter. If someone's house is burning down, a comedian is not going to save them, right? Um and I think that is just like, it's the perfect kind of capstone because maybe part of it is that it is so self-aware, you know, but like I don't know, it just really, it's a full thematic thought expressed with a lot of nuance over the course, and there's just like a bunch of jokes sprinkled in there. Yeah, so I guess, okay, I guess I'm coming down that comedy is my favorite one. I also think, by the way, problematic is like this, it's just less comprehensive, I guess I would say.
Yeah,
The thing that was nice about problematic is the sort of looping back in on itself, which I thought was really funny. The first verse of problematic is he apologizes, and then he apologizes for his problematic apology. Um and it kind of follows that a little bit. Um but it's just not as complete a thought as,
yeah.
comedy was.
So one I do want to point out is like, and I don't know if it's the best song, but I found 30 to be the most personally resonant. Um, I'm turning 30, right? Like, because he turns 30 in
Oh
the middle of
yeah,
this
yeah.
special, right? Like and he starts talking about, like, and he talks about like of all the things that I could connect with, like turning 30 and realizing you're not 20 anymore is the thing that I most closely connect with, because I
Holy
watched
shit.
I watched this around like my 32nd birthday, right? So I'm like
Yeah.
2 years beyond that even, right? And like, by his timeline, he would have turned 30 in the middle of making it, and it would have come out, and he's probably turning 31 soon, right? Like, or within the next 6 months or so. He was born in 1990, which he mentions in the show or in the song. But like, that one hit me right in a way that, like, I don't know. I mean,
Okay, that one didn't hit me, but it's for a very stupid reason. Okay, here's my thought. How many times did he do the take where he looked at the clock and it ticked over to midnight
oh, did he have to
and
reset the
he
clock?
yeah. I that was all I was thinking about. I was like,
Okay,
is this authentic? Is this real? Is he really turning 30 in front of my eyes right now? No. No way. Is
yeah,
he? No. Like that was it. I almost like didn't connect with it on a deeper level just because I was constantly thinking about that moment. There's actually a bit in there that was crazy that I remember thinking about afterwards. Like I had almost absorbed it on this subconscious level, and it exploded like a delayed grenade or something. Where there's a line in there about how he resents his friends because all his friends are having kids,
yeah. Well, my
which
stupid
is
friends are
something
having
I
stupid
feel, right?
children, right? Yeah,
Yeah. But I was too busy just obsessing over whether or not I think that was the authentic him turning 30 or if it was staged. But like the emotions are real, but like are the emotions real? Did he think of this bit after he was 30 and he was like, God, it would have been smart for me to film myself turning 30. And that, I was just like all of those questions were zipping around my head, which I don't think is on the special. I guess maybe it's on the special a little bit just because like the artifice is on display, but I don't think that's on the special at all. I think that's just my like obsessive
yeah.
nature.
I mean, if I'm gonna be like super fair about this too, right? Like, the kids thing applies to both of us, but you like, you're married, right? Like, that's
Mm,
like one of these things that, like, oh, I'm turning 30 and I haven't done, I'm not like this advanced in life yet, right? Like,
yeah, that's
for whatever
definitely true.
traditional definition of that, right? Like, um,
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pieces to that. This is like the millennial ennui, right? There's a lot of
yes,
pieces to that because like it seems like it's one of those things where it's like you can have one but not the other two. It's like you can buy your own home, you can have kids, you can be married, right? But you can't have all three, right? Like I feel, and so like everyone is filled with this envy, right? You are envious of your friends who are settling down to have the family that you want. You're envious of your friends that have the money to afford a house. You're envious of your friends that have the stable relationship. No one is satisfied because nobody has kind of completed the trifecta. Try watching that when you're closer to 40 than 30 now. I'm so sorry.
yeah. I mean,
That's
well,
Lou in the chat.
the last line of the song is like, in 2030 I'll be 40 and I'll kill myself then. So,
Yeah.
go, again, go to therapy.
So something that I think musically is interesting is there is a so I was paying attention to this because I watched it two times. I was paying attention to this a lot on the second watch through, right? Where is there music that is outside of the specific musical songs? And the only thing I was able to recognize was the kind of I would almost call it like a ragtime rhythm, like the boom bum 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 of Welcome to the Internet plays under the whole everything. I think it's the fundamental musical motif, and it's part of my supporting evidence for why stuff that is seemingly unrelated, like FaceTime with my mom tonight or sexting, are songs, right? Even though they don't really interact with any of the other stuff, and I think it's because it's all about the internet, and Welcome to the Internet is kind of the beating heart of this thing. How in agreement are you with that
See,
thesis?
that's interesting because, like, I didn't notice that. But the thing I did notice is the one that comes up, I think, more is, or not more, but more prominently, is Look Who's Inside Again, because it gets a reprisal in the final song, which Welcome to the Internet also does, but it's also the backing track to the Let's Play. And I think there's another moment where it comes in too, like, it's like
Oh, interesting. I actually didn't notice that.
yeah. Um, I think it's like, I think it's inside. I noticed it a couple times. Uh, Also, the thing that bothered me about the Let's Play was just that, like, there is an indie game called Inside, which we talked about on one of these
I know.
podcasts. I just like couldn't stop thinking about that while I watched it, which I thought was otherwise a pretty clever parody of like a Twitch stream. But yeah, um, but I did not notice. I think Welcome to the Internet is the most musical, and by that I mean the most belonging in a musical. It's like I've seen people call it a Disney villain theme. To me, it sounds like a show tune.
Oh,
Um,
interesting. A Disney villain theme. I don't think it's that, but that's an interesting thought.
yeah, no, I mean, like I said, I think it's more of a show tune, but it's definitely recognizable as a thing that's part of musical film or musical theater, right? Like, it's definitely kind of in that vein, rather than being like the other songs are all like various style parodies of pop songs. Um,
Interesting. Okay, that's interesting. I hear it now. The now that you've mentioned it, I do actually also think that Look Who's Inside Again is also kind of running throughout the undercurrent of this. And I really keyed into Welcome to the Internet, but I think that's I don't know. Maybe the Let's Play segment kind of felt the most out of place in a certain sense to me. Um just because I don't think it had a very complete, I don't know, underlying idea, if that makes sense.
yeah, I mean,
But
it's kind of very surface, and I think it was just kind of like another way I can do like a popular internet thing in a way that's like vaguely parodic, right? Like while I talk about like my depression, essentially, right? Because that's like it, right? Like he's trapped in, it's him playing himself trapped in a room and crying because he's depressed, right? Like that's there's not much more than that, and it's very surface, but you know, and it's an internet thing. It's another example of an internet thing that he can talk about, right? Like you know,
yeah, man, that's interesting. That's really interesting. That's really interesting. Because this is sort of like a new revelation. I don't have like complete thoughts on it, but yeah, it's maybe I almost want to. I almost think I think it makes okay. I think it makes this special better by a lot. Because now it's almost feels like those two things are interwoven with one another, which I think is clever and you know impactful, I guess.
yeah. I
Um,
honestly, my hot take is I think the final clip where he like goes outside and the stage laughs at him, he tries to get back in. I think that should have been cut. I think it should have faded to black on him being naked while it plays the "Look Who's Inside Again" reprise. At the end of Goodbye.
oh, at the end of Goodbye. Yeah, I like
Yeah,
the Goodbye song actually. Just on a musical level, I like
yeah,
that song a
no,
lot. But
yeah. The
I
thing,
think yeah, I think you're probably right.
I think
I mean,
Goodbye.
the thing that was devastating, right? Like the kind of the emotional thud that maybe didn't land for me great the first time, but I feel it better thinking about Look Who's Inside Again as a more important song in retrospect is the part where he talks about how satirically or whatever, right? Like we don't need to go outside. Going outside is the worst and it sucks. Let's just
Well, outside is
I was
fake. The internet is real, right? Which is
exactly, right?
yeah.
And I was viewing that solely through kind of the lens of Welcome to the Internet, but I think as this kind of nexus point, as this crossroads of both Look Who's Inside Again and Welcome to the Internet as kind of the core defining like themes. I think that's really clever and stronger and I like it much
Oh,
better
you know what?
in
Yeah,
that sort.
that makes a lot
Do you
of
see what I'm
sense.
saying?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We've both brought half
The
of
funny
this.
thing I was thinking
This,
about with and I like Welcome to the Internet
yeah.
a lot. The funny thing about Welcome to the Internet is it reminded me a lot of a ContraPoints bit that I think she might have done in the canceling video. Maybe it was in the cringe video. She did a video on cringe, which is like maybe also maybe one of like the best things I've ever seen on the internet. Where she dresses up as like a three ring circus. It's either in canceling or cringe, but it's about the performance of it all, right? It's about how the internet plants a camera. It gives everybody the ability to just you know present to perform at all times, right? And it turns the whole world into this like three ring circus, which is what I love so much about Welcome to the Internet's musical identity as this kind of like it feels like a the thought in my head was a what's the
Oh, Gurney.
monkey, like
Or
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
It's just like it's like vaudeville, right?
yeah.
It's like that kind of performance, which in context feels very right for the way that I think a lot of people do interact with the internet, which is in this kind of like not polished, sort of base level compared to something like like a Marvel movie or whatever, which is very high on artifice, low on authenticity, right? The internet is the opposite of that. It's high on
Right.
authenticity, low on artifice. Um, and welcome to the internet kind of like it just makes the whole thing feel like a sideshow, which just that hit me where I live, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, hey, we've been doing this for 6 years, or almost six
Oh
years
my god,
to
you're right.
like, basically no audience other than, our friends.
Yeah, other than our very good friends
Friends.
who were very happy that all of you are listening.
And participating. Thank you for commenting, Lou. uh,
No, I mean, like, but that's definitely very real anxiety. I
yeah.
think that's one of the most real anxieties that millennials feel because in a way, we weren't really trained. So okay, so when I think about the way that my younger sister interacts with the internet, she's like 5, 6, no, she's more than that, 7 years younger than me, right? She grew up in a world where everybody had Facebook in like their adolescence, right? Like as 10 year olds, right? They were
Yeah.
engaging with social media.
We're the
I didn't
bridge
engage with that
generation,
stuff.
right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah. And so the thing is, like, we kind of grew into it, and I do have a lot of the same anxieties that I think, like, my dad would articulate. Of, well, I don't want strangers on the internet following me on Twitter. I don't want them to read. Why would I post that? You know what I mean? Like that's a thought that's like a my dad thought, but it's a thought that I have all the time, right? Where I go to Twitter, I'm typing out a hot take, and I just go, I don't want to tweet this, and I delete it. I feel like the sister in me is the person who tweets everything, right? Who doesn't shut the fuck up on social media. Um, and that's like I feel like that's like a legitimate sort of like feeling of ennui among millennials or whatever, right? Where there
yeah,
is that nervousness to put yourself out there because it is kind of this blank void, and at any individual moment, right? It could hey, it could go great for you. Maybe you go viral and get a whatever, a book deal on your stupid thing that you did, or maybe you get, canceled into the ground and your life is a living hell for however long that takes.
yeah, yeah. No, I absolutely agree. I also wonder how much this plays into kind of like, I don't know about you, but I know that like a lot of kind of like my youth, but there was like a lot of stranger danger type messaging, right?
Yep.
Which like boomer humor is like I don't want to use like boomer humor is like oh, you can't swipe on the magazine or whatever, right? I feel like the equivalent of that for us will be kind of like which is a joke that I heard that I laughed at, which is like when we were kids it was like don't get into the car with strangers. Nowadays it's like hit the app on your phone and get into a car with a stranger, right? Like which is
That is a good bit.
right,
That is
but
a good joke.
it is, but like you can see that like the tired, bowdlerized version of that in 40 years when we're all old, maybe not 40 years. Oh, I turned 30, right? Like maybe this is in like 20 years, right? Like it's like like the boomer humor version of that for us is
Yeah.
going to be like a our equivalent of Ben Garrison making that same type of comic, right? Like um that's like going to slowly lose its funny but still be amusing to us because that's like our sensibility, and like the younger generation is just like not going to get why would you hide yourself like that, right? Like I think you're right. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Boy, Bo Burnham's inside, really bringing out the meat and potatoes of this
Yeah,
podcast. And here I thought we were just going to talk about more Young Justice, which I'm so fucking excited to talk about season 2 of Young Justice, which is probably next week if anybody wants to keep up.
yeah.
But anyway, is there anything else you want to talk about Bo Burnham's Insight before we move on?
I don't think so. The only song I think we skipped over is That Funny Feeling, which is one that like I don't know, like
What is that song about? I don't even
it's
remember.
about the world ending effectively, right? Like, which is a little bit too dystopic for me, like in terms of like it feels like like a step too far. It's also like I think the least memorable song on the soundtrack, but um what the big line is
Oh,
like
right.
20,000 years of this, 7 more to go.
Yeah.
Uh um and it's just all kind of about like the world's about to end, which I don't know, doesn't ring as true as some of the other stuff, even in like a parodical way. Um
Yeah, I mean, I almost think it dips its toe into this weird nihilism that
yeah.
I don't know. That song kind of washed over me.
Yeah, the other two, I'm missing a couple. There's also like Feel Like Shit, which I think is clever as a song, but like you know, empty otherwise, right? Like I think the bit where he does like ladies and guys, like yeah, I feel like shit. Like I think that's fun and clever, but it's not much. And then don't want to know, which I think actually kind of taps to this thing you're talking about, right? Like like how are you feeling? I don't want to know, right? Like that's kind of like what you're talking about. It's like why would I tweet this, which is like a millennial
Yeah.
sensibility, but
Yeah. I think that that anxiety is absolutely there. I like don't want to know pretty good, pretty I mean that's right after sort of there's a break, right? Yeah, it is the first song after the break. Um so it's a nice, kind of introduction back into everything.
yeah. But yeah, those are the only things that I oh, the only other thing I want to talk about that I thought was clever was and I don't know how clever this is like, he obviously doesn't get his hair cut or shave over the course of him filming this. You can see him age throughout this, which you don't kind of notice, or at least I didn't until he the first take of Goodbye is him originally with the
Yeah,
shorter
I
hair.
did notice that. That was also when I noticed it. I didn't get it at first, but then I saw the first take of Goodbye, and I was like, "Oh shit,
Yeah.
this is old. This is the Bono from the beginning, the Bo from the beginning of the special," which sort of helped me kind of string the whole, like the whole thing together, um, which I thought was cool, and I thought was clever. I also just really want to. I don't have anything more complex to say here, but I do think that for a one man show in this room, he did an amazing job
I will
of
agree.
just,
Yeah.
like the beginning of content includes him with this, this spotlight on his forehead, and he slowly brings it up into a disco ball or whatever, and there's just tons of that shit all over this special that is just really really well done. There's one song, and I can't remember what it is, but there's one song where he's singing and he has foot pedals
That's 30,
for
I
the
think.
lights. Is that, yeah, that's 30? Okay. And he has foot pedals for kind of the lights, and he's swapping in and around the mood, and I just thought all of that stuff was all it was just
Yeah.
like great on like a technical craft level, right? um
Welcome to the
which
internet has a
is
lot of that
impressive.
too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like this very slow zoom in and out that speeds up with the tempo of the song, and
Yeah.
and the spinning lights that
There's
he.
also a little bit of this with the aspect ratios, right? For FaceTime with my mom, which is sort of like an R&B song, I guess I would call it, right? Like it has that long intro where the screen is cutting in until you get to a phone aspect ratio, and then
White woman's
the same
Instagram.
sort of thing happens for white woman's Instagram when it goes to a square aspect ratio, which, like, you know it isn't really more notable other than it happened and it just is in service to all this other shit that we've been talking about, but I appreciate the craft of it, right, of the cinematography and the lighting in all of this stuff. I think that that was great. I want to call that out before we move on.
I do want to agree. I want to. So it's a shame because it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. But the night after the first time I watched welcome or I watched Inside twice. The night after the first time I watched it, I went and watched White Woman's Instagram again on YouTube. But it was dark and I was in my room. I was watching it on my phone, and I had the phone in portrait. But because it was so dark, once like it cuts in, it looks like you're looking at like an Instagram post, right? Like it looks perfect, right? Like if you're looking at, but
Oh,
you don't.
interesting.
But it only works if you've got your phone sideways,
Yeah.
because if you got it vertically, then YouTube doesn't play it right.
Right.
Um, but yeah, no, it like watching it on your phone fitted so that it's like the only thing that appears on your phone makes it look like you're watching Instagram, which I think enhances the experience to an extent. But yeah, yep.
Okay, well, how was your week? Tell me all about it.
It was pretty good. I played some Guilty Gear Strive. I moved to the PC because there's less like input lag. Um, I pretty quickly climbed to where I was, and then I dropped down a little bit because I think the killers play more on weekends. Um, and I'm not particularly good, but I'm okay. Um,
The PvP mantra, right?
yeah, I mean, hey, I am the one thing that I am proud of, I guess, is that I have avoided the scrub mindset fairly well, right? Like, my losses are my own. They're not because the opponent is cheap or, right? I would not be quoted on scrub quotes. Um, what did I do otherwise?
I feel that. I feel that for sure. Is that like a growing up thing? I was constantly not doing that for League of Legends, and honestly, even to this day, I would insist that I was correct actually about like a lot of dumb arguments, right, that I would have had for League of Legends. But it's funny because, like, if I think of I think of like Mythics that I'm running now, right, which is sort of like the most competitive content that I'm running. Anytime we ever fail a Mythic, especially because it's against a computer, right, it is always, we fucked up this pull. We should have double pulled. We took too long. We did this. We did that. Right. And that's like a kind of good feeling outside of a PvP context because I never have that feeling of humiliation that makes me mad.
Yeah, no, I think you've identified, like, it's easier to do with PVE, right? Because it's kind of an objective opponent, and it's easier, I think, to do with 1v1 PvP because you'll
Yeah,
always only have yourself to blame, right?
that's
Like,
true. That's true for Hearthstone, right? When I was playing a lot of Hearthstone, I can never blame my jungler. I can never say, "Oh, well, we got ganked and I never got any support from the, or whatever," right? Like nobody fed top lane to lead to me losing,
yeah.
to lead to me losing the game. So,
Yeah, and a lot of the scrub mindset in, like, in these kind of situations are like blaming the mechanics, right? Like, oh, that deck is unfair. And then you that progresses to your opponent, right? Like, oh, you're
mhm.
using a cheap, like, the big one in Guilty Gear Strive is using Soul Bad Guy, who's like he's the main character, but he's also very, very strong. He's like pretty obviously top tier, not unbeatably so, but he very clearly is. Like, he gets a lot of, like, Soul players get a lot of hate, right? In addition to, like, the standard kind of fighting game things, like, oh, throws are cheap, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, or, blaming your opponent for, like, like in the Hearthstone example, would be like, oh, you're using a brain deck and you're being carried by your deck because you have no skill, right? Like, it's like, well, you lost, so who cares, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's my favorite scrub quotes appellation, right? Is like they'll quote the person being a scrub and they'll say dash guy who lost, um, which but yeah. Otherwise, what did I do? I watched Young Justice season 2 because I wasn't sure which one we were doing today, which is
Oh, did
fine.
you finish it?
Yeah.
Wow.
You can. So I've been feeding Buddy my stream of consciousness as I'm watching it, and you can tell when I'm more drawn into it because I stop tweeting my random, or effectively tweeting my random thoughts at you. Um,
Oh, yeah.
uh,
I'm very excited to continue. I've been like watching Young Justice and Better Call Saul kind of back and forth a lot. Um, Mostly I don't really know why. I just Better Call Saul is so good. God, it's so good. There's just like so many little things in that show that I like. The magic of a good TV show is so hard to like really talk about, but it's there, and I don't know, I love it.
yeah,
So I've been doing that. I've also been playing Total War Warhammer 2. The new Total War Warhammer 2 DLC came out, um, which is the final one. It is the end. We are at the end of Total War Warhammer 2 after a gazillion Lord packs and everything else. And the final two Lords are Torox the Brass Bull and a rework of the Beastman, and Ashiatl the something something. He's a lizardman, like chameleon skink who sneaks around. And they both just have great mechanics. There's a ton of reworked stuff that comes into it. The dwarves got a pretty expansive rework, um, which was interesting. Like one of the things about Total War Warhammer 2 is that over time the reworks of previous factions got more and more kind of complex and involved, right? At first it was the dwarves who just got a very minor, crafting system. That was their upgrade. Then you have this whole system with bloodlines, which kicks in for the vampire counts. Then you have this whole system with the elector counts and the empire or whatever. And over time, you look back at that very first set of DLC that includes like the dwarves, and it's like, boy, the dwarves got nothing. And we were all pretty sure they were going to just continue to have nothing at all, right? We were going to go into Total War Warhammer 3 and the dwarves are just going to kind of be a little bit lame because they just happened to be first in line. Like they were most complete at the time, but now they are sort of outdated. Including a pretty substantial rework of dwarfs and dwarf mechanics was a nice surprise. Another nice surprise was the addition of ogre mercenaries, which has been honestly a little bit weird and contentious. Ogres are a faction in the Warhammer universe, but they are a problematic faction because their base unit is a monstrous infantry, right? This gigantic called, like they're called man eaters, right? This gigantic ogre who is definitionally large. And so there was this lingering question of how is CA gonna handle that, right? There are a lot of different, like there are a lot of different races that have a lot of different specializations. So for instance, the wood elves have this specialization on missile infantry, and so do the vampire counts, right? um or the vampire coast, but the vampire coast specialization of missile infantry is pirates, so it's gunpowder weapons, right? um Whereas the elves are archers and include, right, like fast moving archers that can ambush from the forest, that are, that can fire while moving. Whereas the power of the Vampire Coast line comes from, essentially zombies wielding cannons, shooting just incredibly powerful line attack gunpowder weapons. And you can kind of see how like their whole roster is built around this core concept of, hey, let's take, you know gunpowder weapons and make it the core theme of this roster with whatever else supporting stuff that there is. And I was interested in a version of ogres which said, let's say the core of your roster is monstrous infantry. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with getting absolutely gobsmacked by a line of space experiment, because all base experiment have anti-large just as like their default state or whatever. um and CA has instead decided to sidestep the issue by saying, you know what, we're not going to do a full army for the ogres. What we're going to do is we're going to say every once in a while around the map, a little camp pops up. There's an ogre camp. If you bring your army to that camp, you can recruit some ogres. Like anybody can do this, right? Lizardmen, chaos, dwarfs, greenskins, whoever, right? You can just pick up a couple of ogres for your army, which has made for some interesting stuff that is not normally feasible. So, for instance, dwarves famously don't have any cavalry, right? They have powerful artillery, powerful ranged line. They're all heavily armored. They all have high leadership, right? But there is nothing like a charging. They have nothing to do like cycle charges with. They can never do a hammer and anvil tactic, just because they have no cavalry whatsoever. If you go to an ogre camp, you can get what are called Mournfang cavalry, which is a big monstrous. It's ogres on these dog boar things, just like they're just like big things or whatever. Well, now all of a sudden you have a dwarf army with cavalry. Is it good that dwarves can now cover this weakness of theirs, or is it bad because now you can kind of um do
Round out.
everything?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. People in the community are talking about it. The big thing really is the Beastman rework, which has made Beastman insanely cool and very fun. The main mechanic are what are called herdstones and blood grounds. Basically, as Beastman, you're running around as a horde, and when you attack a settlement, you can raise a herdstone in that settlement, which sort of marks the surrounding area as like your territory. And the battles you fight and the settlements you destroy, you raise, you sack, you whatever, right? They contribute to an overall, like ruin. It's called marks of ruination, right? Eventually you decide to do a ritual at the herdstone. You lock off this blood ground forever. Nobody can settle in it or anything anymore, and you get a bunch of stuff that is like good for the future, which is a pretty sweet mechanic for the Beastmen, right? Um, Famously, the new Lord Torox has a mechanic called Momentum that gives him points that he can then spend to reset his movement points for the turn. So something that you can do is fight just dozens and dozens of battles in a single turn, because you're just constantly resetting Torox's movement, running to a new army, fighting a new battle, getting a new point of rampage, and just go and go, or momentum rather. You just go and go and go and go and go and go and go. Some of the big Total War YouTubers just had these obscenely long turns. There was one with Legend of Total War who did it was like 27 battles over the course of a single turn. That whole turn took 3.5 hours, and Torox was almost max level by the end of it. And it's just, it's funny. It's super broken, but it's like broken in a cool way, in the way that it feels good to, like, if you're in a checkers match where you do the hop 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 hop, right? That kind of thing. So I don't know. There you go. That's your latest Total War Warhammer update, I guess.
Well, fair enough. Fair enough. Um, you want to talk about WoW stuff at all?
I guess, I mean, we probably should, right? It's a huge deal, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, the bigger Blizzard Activision stuff, I guess.
Yeah.
Uh,
So for anybody who's been living under a rock, the state of California brought a um, discrimination lawsuit against Activision Blizzard, basically saying that they treat women employees terribly, including sexual harassment, including not getting paid as much as their male counterparts, including being passed over for promotion in favor of their male counterparts. There's a ton of stuff in this. It's been huge news over the past couple of days. Tons of people are boycotting Blizzard games, and man, God, like there's just so much to this. A couple of statements have been released. The statements from the Blizzard side of Activision have been, they kind of range from like okay to bad, in my opinion. And then the Activision side have released statements that are truly deranged, and I am like, what the actual fuck?
oh, which statement is this? Because I haven't been following all of like the
Okay,
back and
so the
forth.
very first statement. Well, okay, so should we stake our personal claims here? Does that matter?
I mean, so
You
I'm
and I have done the same thing, I think, right? We both canceled our subscriptions, right?
yeah. So my subscription renewed in July. It will
Okay.
expire in October because they do it on 3 month renewals. And I put in the comment box that I'm troubled by the lawsuit, and I will be reevaluating in October when it rolls over, right? Because I am kind of like a very much like, let's see how this plays out, right? Like, um, the state of California is not above using things so if you look at the legal, I will link in the show notes to a legal analysis, and like the stronger case by far is about the discrimination parts. Like the individual sexual harassment kind of bits are a little bit less strong. They're like much more shocking, right? And I actually think I have a problem with the kind of like the like there is a female employee who committed suicide, and the state of California puts this on the toxic work culture. I don't think that that's clear at all, and I think that's kind of like my read is that some of this was put in there to gin up the kind of attention that's been gotten here,
Yeah.
because no one wants this to go to a law. Like the sad reality is this will probably be settled because it is too expensive to become a lawsuit unless somebody at Blizzard gets angry enough that they want to
I don't know, man.
play it out.
So
It might be there, right? Like you said, some of these
yeah.
statements are like very like not well tuned for PR. Is I think the nicest way to put it. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
so I guess so I've also canceled my subscription. I renewed in July. You know, my I have a 6 month rolling sub. I've had a 6 month rolling sub since Legion. You know, basically once I realized that WoW is a game that I'm just always going to be playing on the back burner, I just moved to a 6 month sub. I've been doing that since Legion. It renewed in July, so it's ticking over like January of next year or something like that, right? And I also put in the comment, I was like, this lawsuit, you know, I need to see some form of improvement based on this, right? Like that's how theoretically Blizzard retains me as a customer. Mostly this is just a point of protest on my part, right? Like
right.
when I was thinking about this, I was like, someone's gonna walk into a room, somebody's gonna walk into like a meeting room at Activision headquarters and say, we lost 250,000 subs because of the lawsuit, right? I want to be a part of that number. I think that that's important. I think that that's probably the most impactful thing that I can do is be a part of that number. Whether or not I'm going to keep playing WoW while I still have my sub rolling. And then obviously reevaluate based on whatever happens in the last 6 months. But the thing that really got me to cancel my subscription was the response to the initial article of the lawsuit going of the complaint being filed, right, which was published in Bloomberg, and then the response got sent to Jason Schreier or somebody like that. I think it was Jason Schreier at Bloomberg, and the response was like, this is overzealous, state employees. The claims made in here are distorted, they're false, they're old, just like truly like very fighting tooth and nail against everything in that lawsuit. And I just like, I cannot get behind that. That is so far from the truth as far
Well, I
as I
mean,
understand it, that I just like couldn't deal.
see that's the thing to me, right? Like it's like I don't know if it's far from the truth or not, right? And like I can't know. I'm not inside of Blizzard. Maybe you've got more insight than I do because you work in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, part of this is that obviously I've been working in southern, like, literal SoCal game development, right? And as far as I'm concerned, this is not shocking or maybe it's shocking, but it's not like I'm surprised, right? Because everywhere I have ever worked, which has never included Blizzard, has had a zillion stuff like this. Like every one of these stories I feel like I've read, I have heard or participated in or seen some version of this, like just across the board. I think this is just endemic to the culture of, you know, I guess to be specific, right? Maybe SoCal game
So,
development, but
so
I
but
I don't know.
to what extent? Like, so to me, the thing here is like if they covered up any particular incident and didn't do it right, or like it didn't deal with it properly, right? Because
Mhm.
at some scale, right, like you can't help but ending up hiring a dickwad at some point,
Yeah.
and the kind of way you should be judged, at least in my opinion, is like when something happens, how do you deal with it? And if
Yeah,
the
no, notoriously, I think it is hard to fire people, and I think people in game development, I have seen people stay on longer than they are good at their job just because the company is so squeamish about actually pulling the trigger on firing people. This is also kind of corroborated on Twitter. A bunch of people have said that, right? Like, one, I can't remember who it was. I guess I won't quote any names, but someone who was an employee was kind of asked the question, like, why, how did it come to this? And she was like, it's actually nothing malicious. It's just that, Blizzard as an institution has a very hard time firing people. They just kind of tend to shunt people to the side and hope they leave on their own, which is not a great way to get a toxic person out of your, like out of your company, right? They just kind of tend to linger there and keep causing incidents until you finally, pull the trigger or whatever. And that is absolutely in keeping with my understanding of games development, right?
Yeah, I
I
think that's true at a lot of institutions, and especially like when
Yeah.
it's like what I'll, for lack of a better term, called low level toxicity, right? Like in my line of work, right, like somebody not producing enough, like not doing enough work essentially, right? Like, um, you're given a lot of chances to prove yourself, which is very beneficial, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're in a position where like maybe you just have a bad quarter or whatever, for whatever reason. But also like there's a lot of there's a lot like you said, there's a lot of kind of, I think, institutional um just kind of like hesitancy to throw someone out, because I mean in some ways there's like, you open yourself up to a wrongful termination suit, right? You
Yep.
just like try and make it unbearable for the person so they leave themselves. Theoretically, this is supposed to be the advantage of like an at-will employment state, which California is, right? Like that you can fire
Yep.
someone with no reason whatsoever. um if I really want to dig into this, like, I am kind of baffled by like the calls I've seen in response, like this is why we need unionization, and like frankly unionization would make firing people harder. Just because like that's like that is the purpose of a union, right? Is to keep people from being fired.
Yeah.
um and I could go into more detail here, but I don't think that's within the kind of scope of this
Yeah, so
podcast.
like from my perspective, this is all
Yeah.
very real. And by the way, I think the other piece of this is drinking. I tweeted this the other day, right? Like part of this, frat boy culture that gets named in the suit is an upside. I honestly don't know
No, no, I mean,
it is literally an upside. It is part of the appeal, right? That you're going to go to work and you're going to hang out with people that are friendly and that you're friends with, right? And after work, you're going to go to the bar and you're going to talk about whatever and you're going to do this. And your company events are going to have a lot of booze. You're going to have an open bar. People are going to get wasted, right? Like that is insanely common, right? As far as I've seen,
oh yeah.
I love a lot, like and I don't want to understate the darkness of that because it is truly dark, right? But it's kind of it's just sort of like it is the dark side of the moon of that piece of the culture. If you want a world in which after your shift everybody goes to the bar and gets wasted together, right? If that's fun and that is a part of the culture, that introduces a lot of really fucked up situations where somebody gets wasted and destroys a boundary that otherwise would not have been kind of erected, I guess.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, and the other side of that coin too is like sometimes those boundaries get pushed and it's not a problem, right? Like
yeah,
they're like I was actually talking to my brother about this. Like I so for the first time in a long time I commuted to work, and driving home was miserable. Traffic is terrible. I work out of Cambridge, Cambridge, Massachusetts, and just driving home to New Hampshire was miserable. And I was talking to my brother about it. It's like, this is, he was talking to one of his friends. I was like, this is how work affairs happen, right? Like, you don't want to drive in traffic, so instead, after work, you go to the bar and you get to know somebody, and it's there's like a mutual connection there, right? Like,
Yeah.
it
I mean,
happens, right?
people start dating at their jobs, right? Especially in
Also, a
game
thing you
development
probably
where
shouldn't do.
overtime. Right, well, like, overtime is a thing, right? And the company's gonna order pizzas for everybody because we're all working mandatory overtime to do,
Yeah,
like, this or that, and so now I'm spending 12 hours a day, and I'm memeing with people across whatever, like, these barriers get broken down all the time, right? And when I think about, like, so Rachel, Rachel's job completely unrelated from game development, um, she just doesn't have that sort of relationship with her coworkers, and her coworkers don't seem to have that relationship with each other, right? They have a very kind of clean, sterile, corporate, right, relationship with one another, which I I think prevents a lot of this stuff from kind of festering. I think it's bad, and I think it's also uniquely bad at Blizzard in a bunch of ways that are, like on top of this, right? Obviously the HR department is not drunk when they choose not to fire somebody who has had a bunch of sexual harassment campaign.
right.
Like, that's not on alcohol, right? But I do think that that's a pretty big, a pretty big undercurrent to all of this stuff, which is just like, yeah, basically any industry event you're going to, any after party, it's just everybody's going to be swimming in booze the entire time, and I feel like that, that's just dangerous. That is a dangerous sort of like ecosystem to
Yeah,
be working in, and it is a breeding ground for these kinds of predators, right? To have bad shit happen. Anyway, I was explaining this. So the very first thing Activision says is, this is bullshit. It's distorted. They specifically called it out how the yeah, it's the Department of Fair Enforcement and Housing, right? DFEH, I think, um, who issued the lawsuit. How this is like an unaccountable state body that answers to no one. They're these like bureaucrats or whatever. It's just like that was the initial response. Then J. Allen Brack, who's the president of Blizzard, sent an email that I think was honestly just weird, but it was bad. It didn't really do much. It was just kind of like, "Hey, I'm listening to these things." He mentions Gloria Steinem, and it's just like, "What the fuck?"
yeah.
Fuck?
So a lot of this, to me, just to be fair about it, is like, there's a lot of stuff that you do as an organization to like limit yourself to like legal liability, right? Like, you, Jay Allen Brack cannot come out and say, like, we accept full responsibility for all of that, because that's like disastrous from just like a pure corporate governance level, right? Like,
Sure.
that potentially opens up I believe that potentially opens up to him like some sort of like
Oh,
malfeasance
like
claim.
personal, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Then Mike Morheim did a one where he was like, "Hey, we failed you." Chris Metzen said something very similar. I think all of these statements have sucked generally. And then Fran Townsend, who is a woman in like the high end of Activision, who's been working at the company for 4 months, sent an internal email basically saying that this was all bullshit. Like, kind of what the first, it was like, this is all bullshit. It's just fuck, like we're gonna fight against this or whatever. Apparently, Activision had a Zoom meeting today, whose details linked, that said that Activision was planning on fighting the suit. They were gonna fight. Um, and to be clear, it is specifically Activision, not Blizzard, in this
yeah.
piece
I
of
mean,
the.
there's some weird technical details here too.
Yeah,
Luz contributes that they all read as disingenuous, which I like. It's hard to, like, it is disingenuous, right? Because like,
yep.
no one on the Activision side can say how they really feel unless they're already not at the company, which some have, right? Like,
Yeah,
but
I mean, I think the best statements have come from employees, right? Steve Denuser, the lead writer on the WoW team, wrote just like 3 tweets that were. It was like, honestly, I read those tweets, I was just like, whoa, somebody gets it, right?
yeah, I mean, so
Jeff Hamilton, a senior dev on the WoW team, also wrote a whole thread about, one of the things about Blizzard, which is interesting, is every Blizzard employee has like, the opinions here are not the opinions of my employer, which is sort of a double-edged sword, because then they all said, I the Fran Townsend does not speak for me. These are my opinions, and then like went off about whatever else,
yeah, I mean,
which then got really stupidly interpreted by the WoW community that made me want to pull my hair out.
I mean, the kind of truth here, right? Like it's like they are free to speak their minds in a way because I don't think Activision is going to fire them in the wave of this because that would look worse, right? Like that's like a
Yeah.
much more of a PR marketing disaster. Um, I think like so the kind of like as I understand it, the big kind of like legal blocks here, which like if either Activision settles, it's going to be unsatisfactory because we're not going to have any sort of like insight into like how much was true, how much wasn't. The other thing that could happen is it could be like I'm going to call it a technicality, but so the way this is supposed to work, as I understand it, is the board is supposed to bring it to Activision's attention and give Activision a chance to rectify it.
Okay.
Um, and that may have happened, or like that happened in a way that like Activision disagreed with the board as to like how well that they had dealt with the problem.
Yeah.
But the board has a limited period of time to act on that, and it's like 2 years, and it's been 3. But Activision may have waived their right to it. But Activision may claim that they waived that right under duress, right? Like if essentially the board comes to them and says either waive this right or we're coming after you, right? Like that's a problem legally, right? And so if any of that gets resolved in that kind of sphere, where like you know, this gets dismissed on the fact that the board didn't behave right, that's also going to
Yeah.
be unsatisfactory because we're not going to
Yep.
get like the kind of investigation. I think where the much more gray version of this comes in is like you know the labor board brings it to Activision's attention and Activision reacts in a way that like a person might view as reason, like let's say in fan like I'm not saying this is what happened, but like let's say
Sure.
theoretically um the labor board brings to the attention of Activision Blizzard that they've gotten several complaints from female employees about this kind of behavior. And Activision's like, oh my gosh, we must have failed in somewhere in HR. We're going to address this immediately. And then they do. But they don't do it as much as, say, the board wants, or like in a way that, like, the board also wants them to like hire somebody to come in and do something like, no, we don't need that. We've handled this, right? Like there's like some debatability in there as to whether or not Activision has handled it. And this is like where like how much do you hold Activision to account for like things that happen but they've acted to address versus like how much of it is still going on, how much of it is still going on despite Activision's best efforts, how much
Yeah.
more should they like that's where all like the details and I think where the real substance of the issue comes out. um but we won't know about that for a
Yeah, and
long
I think
time.
part of the issue is that Activision already has a really shitty reputation in the first place.
Yeah.
Like something that, to be honest, I noted this and I thought it was incredibly disheartening. I thought Mike Morheim and Chris Metzen, who are two guys I liked a lot and I would otherwise hold in very high regard, right? I think their statements sucked. And I was like, wow, well, at least part of the frustration is that as the details come out, right, it's pretty clear that most of this seems to be like quote unquote old Blizzard, right? Like a lot of this was happening before 2018. Mike Morheim steps down, Jay Allen Bragg becomes Blizzard president or whatever, right? So it happens in the big executive sphere or whatever, right? Um, and so it just felt very strange to have Mike Morheim and Chris Metzen go like, oh, I didn't know, I had no, how could no, and that's why I was like, these suck.
No,
I hate these statements,
I
and
I
the
I'm
and
I'm I was saying
okay, you yeah, are you gonna disagree with me?
just a little bit, right? Like, because I'm
Okay,
much more willing to see this as kind of like between a rock and a hard place, right? Like, one, they both probably have a lot of stock in the company still, right? Like,
sure.
and two, like, I would not be surprised if they got some sort of non-disparagement agreement, right? Like, how much can they say, right? Like, how
Oh,
much,
okay.
and like Chris Metzen still voices Thrall, right? Like, how much?
He actually doesn't, but okay.
Oh, never mind
They
then.
replace him as a voice. They just found another voice actor to do it.
Okay,
I'm pretty sure.
um,
I think if they wanted him to stay on and keep voicing Thrall, he would. But my understanding is that they picked somebody else up.
okay. I mean, so my bigger thought is that it's probably a non-disparagement clause, right? Like,
Okay.
and also, I mean, and the other half of that is like, potentially to blame them, right? Like, um, like, part of it too is like if they have a lot of stock in the company, they're not going to say anything because they don't want to hurt their own fortunes, which is, to
Yeah.
your point, a shitty thing to do, but like, also like a very human reaction. But it's also hard. It's hard to tell these things from the outside, right? Like,
Yeah. I mean, part of what I find frustrating is that it's all very wishy-washy. Honestly, on both sides, right? Like something that frustrates me about the way that a lot of players have reacted to this is that they're doing this thing of sort of the performative boycott of, well, that clinches it. I'm gonna delete all my characters. I'm gonna delete all my gold. I'm never scorched earth, right? But it's like, okay, I understand the impulse, but that's kind of the logically incorrect approach to take, right? Because if you sort of tell Activision there's no way to get me back as a customer, you've lost me forever, you're not really providing the incentive for change that you're theoretically looking for, right? Wouldn't it make more sense to sort of say, hey, I'm willing to come back if you fix this. Here are whatever reasonable sort of things, right?
Yeah.
And I was also hoping to hear some form of that, right? Like they did this in the Blitzchung thing, right? Blitzchung happened, everybody freaked out, and Blizzard immediately, or not immediately, it was like a week and a half later. They were like, okay, you know what? We think the core fundamental principle is correct. It is not appropriate to voice, your political opinions during a Hearthstone esports broadcast. He deserved to be punished, but the punishment was too long. We're gonna shorten it by 6 months. We're gonna do this. We're gonna make it right by, we're gonna give him all his
Restore his
prize
winnings.
money,
Yeah, yeah.
all this other stuff, right? Like where it's like, okay, here's some very clear terms. And I remember at the time, that's what I said. I was like, I also don't think that Hearthstone should be a political arena, right? But I do think that they went too far and they should restore his money. So it's like, here I have set a set of conditions that Blizzard can now meet to sort of get me back on board, right?
Right. I mean, so canceling everything makes sense if your goal is to drive Activision Blizzard into the ground so that it no longer exists.
Yeah.
Which, and there's like a flavor of person who wants that, right? Like, that like it's become too bloated to like even make good games anymore, right? Which, but I think I largely agree with you that this is like people who in 6 months are going to be like, is there any way for me to restore my deleted characters, right? Like,
yeah. I mean, and that's exactly what that's exactly what I'm hoping for, right? I just want to see. Oh my God, is it posting some spicy stuff in the chat? Our and so I just feel like I want to see something concrete, because that's the thing that's bothering me about a lot of this situation. The top level stuff. Like if I'm J. Allen Brack, I don't want to talk about, dude, Gloria Stein. What the fuck? Tell me specific. What do you want to do? Right? You are the president of the fucking company. Surely you have some idea for how to go, you know what? I'm doing this, I'm doing that. We're making sure this is happening. We're X, Y, and Z, right? All this other stuff. Part of the other frustrating piece of this, and the part that has been the weirdest for me to deal with on a personal level, is that most of the people who have been named or outed or whatever, of which I'm not going to name anybody on the podcast because I think that's a little bit weird and unethical. Um, they're all not at the company anymore. They haven't been at the company for a while, and it's like, how do you hold Blizzard accountable for someone who left or resigned or got, like, we don't know the details or whatever, right? But like, is if in 2014 this thing happened that we would all say is bad, and the person left in 2016, what does canceling my subscription in 2020 do, really? That I also find an intensely difficult and complicated question to sort of square, right?
yeah.
Like, am I punishing Blizzard because I was unknowingly complicit when I paid them in 2014 for whatever expansion was out at the time or whatever? I don't know. That's a really complicated kind of moral quandary.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. Like one, so the biggest problem I think I have personally with the lawsuit is they do name a couple of people, but not as defendants, just as like examples.
Yeah.
And like they have like John Doe as defendants to be named later when they figure out who they're actually supposed to blame, and like bringing them as like examples without like giving them a chance to defend themselves in court, like that doesn't sit right with me as kind of like a just like from like a what I think the purpose of the legal system is type of deal.
Yep.
And then I think the biggest problem with say like J. Allen Brack right now is that if Activision actually wants to fight this, J. Allen Brack can't admit anything, right? Like if he says we're going to do stuff to make sure this doesn't happen, that's basically an admission of guilt, right? Like even if you take steps to ameliorate it, that can be brought up as and that sucks. But like that's also kind of like I don't know what the corporate structure of Activision Blizzard is, and I stopped taking interest. Like when the Blitzchung thing happened, the biggest thing I did was I sold all my shares of Activision Blizzard because I thought that was like that's like a bomb I didn't want to deal with, right? Like
Sure.
hey, maybe that was a good. I didn't actually check what the stock price on it did, but but the but like how like Jalen Brack is the president of Blizzard, right? But like Activision's like the controlling partner here, right? Like he
He is
Bobby
not the
Kodak's
CEO. He is, yeah.
Bobby Kodak's the guy who's in charge, right? So like, who's how like is the right thing for him to like give up his job, right? Like so that he can like speak his mind. Like maybe, right? Like I like and like maybe it's like, and how much do you fault him for not doing it, right? Like maybe the best thing for him to do would be to give up his job and like and speak his mind and like go find another job elsewhere or something. But like,
Yeah, I mean, the worst part of this is it also came right up alongside the Warcraft 3 Reforged news or whatever. Like, Jason Schreier had been working on one of his investigations into why Warcraft 3 Reforged sucked, and basically the answer was Activision pressured them to cut costs and push out this game, and you just kind of like get it out the door. And something that Schreier said is like it's like the first flop of Blizzard's whole career, right? Which is a nuts thing to think about, but is pretty technically true. Like even stuff that we remember in hindsight as being worse, right? Like we might all agree that Warlords of Draenor is a bad expansion. Warlords sold like gangbusters, kind of like every other Warcraft expansion, right? Um, and imagine a world where JL and Brack gets pushed out of Blizzard. Is this a world where Activision now takes even more, like exerts even more control or whatever on
I
all
mean,
this stuff?
on the other hand, right? Like if the allegations are to be believed, that might be the right. Like Activision's, a very corporate entity, but in a very
Yep.
corporate entity will have a very strict HR that won't let this
Mhm.
shit happen, right? Like as you pointed out, a lot of this stuff is old Blizzard stuff, right? It's
Well, to be so okay, so I have two things on that. One, I do think that's somewhat true, but I do think that at the end of the day, Activision, at least everyone I have ever known, like I said, I think this is just endemic in, at the very least, Southern California's game development sphere,
right,
right?
but
And I think that's borne out, right? We've seen it with Riot. We've seen it with Riot like 4 times now. We've seen it with, and the guy still works there. We've seen it with Insomniac, right? Which is up in Burbank. I mean, like you just list a gazillion of these, right?
yeah,
So I don't think and that's something else that I think is a little bit unclear, right? Like how much of this stuff is Blizzard, World of Warcraft, how much of it is Hearthstone, how much of it is any of these Call of Duty studios, right? Like Activision owns a ton of this shit, right? And these are all based in Blizzard as well, right? Like,
yeah. I
or I'm
mean,
sorry, based in LA as well.
so I understand what you're saying, but like I think the unfortunate truth is that like a lot of this is gets solved by like a big corporate entity not saying no more fun, right? Like
Yeah.
I can tell you from like where I've been, moving from small companies to big corporate entities, like there's less opportunity for this stuff when HR has a much more iron grip on things, right? Like, which
Yep.
sucks, but like because there's a very similar story to be told about Silicon Valley, which is where I was for a while, and like very similarly, the companies I worked for, like one of them very proudly had beers on tap, like the other one had a fridge full of beer. Um,
Oh man. Yeah. I mean, I'm very frustrated by a lot of. Okay, I don't want to be too specific here. There's a lot of folks who are doing this thing where they're like, I'm gonna go play insert any other game here, right? Because it's not evil like Activision Blizzard is or whatever. And I just, you know, I'm sorry to say, I remember it's not my experience. I don't know that it's funny. These war stories tend to be funny. Like you tell them conversationally, right? Like, oh yeah, when I was at here and here, right? They are like this happened and it was crazy and oh this person was sleeping with their secretary and then the secretary sued and then like all the yeah, those stories are so fucking common. Everybody has them, and they have them for everywhere, right? They have them for companies that nobody even cares about, right? Like Nexon, right? Which is like an Asian MMO company, also has offices in LA and also cross pollinates with all of these other studios. And so you're hearing about shit at like Nexon, even though nobody on Twitter knows or cares about Nexon. I feel like a lot of this, to wrap this around, I feel like a lot of this is because Blizzard is a lot of people's dream studio,
yeah,
right? You're seeing a lot of this like, oh, my dream job was to work at Blizzard.
it's
Now
it's
it's
like
terrible.
it's like Paris syndrome for like gamers.
It really, yeah. I mean, it's like a parasocial relationship with a game studio
Like,
almost, right? There's this idea that, oh, if I was working on Blizzard on the original WoW team, it would have been all fun all the time. Like, listen, I know people who worked on the original WoW team. It's a job, right? Like In a certain sense, I almost want to say there are no dream jobs, right? Like, any job that you're ever doing is going to have stupid bullshit that you're going to have to, that you're going to have to put up with. It's going to have coworkers that you don't like. It's going to have managers that are bad. Like one of the stories that's running around on Twitter of, and it is a legitimate story that I think accurately identifies a manager who is bad at his job and quite profoundly so, right? But that's bro,
Life.
that's everywhere. That's like, what I mean? And that's a complicated thing to, where do you split a hair and say this is, I don't know, this is a bad manager, and you can have a bad manager working at the fucking Gap in the mall, right? And this is systemic sexual harassment, right? You know, I don't
Yeah.
know, but
No, no. I mean, what's the There's a joke that goes something like, you hate your job. There's a support group for that. It's called the bar, and everybody goes after work, right? Like,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
but yeah, no. I mean, it's tough, right? Like, and hey, you know, like I said, we'll see where it goes in 3 months. I will be intrigued if Blizzard actually, or like if Activision actually fights this out. Um, See what comes out in 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 uh in Discovery, right? Because like that'll be that'll be nasty, right? Because like
That would be insane. They would have to show all of their records in public documents, right?
uh
Can you seal that stuff? I don't
you
know.
can seal some of it if it's got like so the big thing that happened. I'm not a lawyer, right? Like I
Sure.
don't think
Not
anybody
neither
from
of us
Blizzard is
are.
watching this. It surely isn't taking legal advice from me,
Yeah.
but I know from like the Fortnite Apple stuff, like there's stuff that's supposed to stay under seal because it contains like trade secrets and business secrets, but a lot of that leaked, right? Like that was a big thing that like it wasn't super well secured, and a lot of it went public, and also there was some other stuff there, but like um
Yeah, I mean that's exactly what I'm thinking, right? Like imagine a world where I can get my hands, maybe I don't get names, right? But I get my hands on like the payroll documents from Blizzard, and I can see numbers for what they're paying people and everything like that. Like, oh
I
my god, if I would be have such a gigantic boner if I worked at Kotaku, right?
I think the even like the easier version of this too, right? Is like it's called like sometimes called like the like the billion person syndrome, or it's like the Chinese doctor syndrome or something. It's essentially, if you get a large enough population, right? Like China has like a billion people in it, right?
Yeah.
I can find an inordinate number of anecdotes about, say, Chinese doctors behaving badly. This doesn't say anything about Chinese doctors. This just says, like, I can leave you 20 anecdotes, right? And I'll list them and be like, wow, Chinese doctors must be terrible. No, there's just a lot of Chinese doctors, right? Like,
Yeah.
um, similarly, for a company of this size, I'm sure there are there are a large number of sexual harassment complaints, and maybe they were all dealt with. But if you're just processing them as anecdotes, like we as humans don't process scale well, right? Like
Yeah.
any large company is
Very
going to
true.
have a lot of things that might have been all dealt with properly. I'm not saying they are, but there's a theoretical world where like things were dealt with properly, and they still end up looking bad because there's enough of them out there, enough of these things out there. Uh, well,
It's
we've gone
fucking
over.
complicated. That's
Yeah,
all I know.
we've gone over by 20 minutes.
Yeah, yeah. This should have been the episode, I guess. Maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
I said to myself earlier today, I was like, "Are we going to talk about this?" I don't
Uh,
want to take that long.
how can we not?
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, if you'd like to email us about what you thought about Inside or, the Blizzard sexual harassment drama, you can email us at subdersplaygames@gmail.com or podcast@subdersplaygames.com. You can watch us at twitch.tv/subdersplaygames. If these go out live, you can follow us on YouTube, rate and review us on all the podcast services. We've got a million different ways to engage, which is the other inside reference I wanted to get in here. But that's everything I think I have. Buddy, you have anything you want to promote?
I do have one thing I want to promote. Number one, Grime releases next week, August 2nd, Monday, August 2nd. Grime is coming out. I'm gonna be doing a live stream. I'm gonna be doing not a big stream, but a more or less all day stream of Buddy Gets Good Grime. We're gonna see how far we can. We're gonna see how far we can go. Last Friday we started by doing the demo because the demo is the first level or whatever. So
Does progress
we're gonna
save between the two?
I don't actually know the answer to that. Mostly because I was not playing the actual demo. I was playing the full game, but just playing the first level.
Okay.
But so yeah, so I'm gonna be doing an all day stream next week. I'm pretty sure I'm also gonna be doing AMA with the devs, kind of like early in the morning. So that's big news. Other big news is we released a cinematic trailer today, and I recorded an Akupara podcast about that, with the creative lead of PlaySense, who are like a trailer house, like a cinematic trailer house. So imagine the cinematic trailers that play in front of like a WoW expansion, StarCraft, Final Fantasy 14, any of those kinds of like cinematic trailers that aren't, or, Total War, Warhammer 2, right? Like any of those that aren't in engine but are fully rendered or whatever. They were insanely cool. And Alex sat down with me for 30 minutes and I chatted with him about what it was like to kind of like go piece to piece and make a trailer of that fidelity, um, which was sweet. So you can go find both of those. Well, you can find the podcast and the trailer now. They are, the trailer's on IGN and the podcast is on the Akupara YouTube channel. And next week you can find, actually, for real, Grime this time for real. It's coming out August 8th.
I'm
Let's go.
I'm excited. It seems like
I'm
something.
excited for you to play it. This might be the best like Akupara game that I'm like, this is a good game for like Mango to play.
Yeah, I mean, I wait within. That's why I wanted to know if progress transferred between the two, because like maybe I'd play the demo this week, or maybe I just
Yeah,
wait.
I don't know. I don't know the answer. The answer is maybe. But I don't know offhand.
Yeah, I'm sure
If
it's
it
on the
does.
page if it does.
Yeah.
So yeah. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to say until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.